Okay, so here's 10 things I learned through the process of illustrating my own book. I'm an author. I've written a lot of books. I've written a bunch of novels. They're right here. I've written a bunch of nonfiction books. Those are right here. But what I had never done is illustrated one of my own books. Even though I've been an artist for years and years and years, I never did it until recently with this book. Hang on, where'd it go? With this book, The Tree Collectors, Tales of Arboreal Obsession, which is filled with my own illustrations of the people I talk to and their trees. So the first thing I learned going through this process is to work out some concepts for the art ahead of time, because all of the images need to look like they come from the same world. So long before I even put a book proposal together, I filled so many notebooks with just drawings of trees and people and just different ideas about how I might approach this. This is just one of like tons of these notebooks that I just filled with more and more drawings of trees and people. Like, that time was so well spent because by the time I got the book proposal together, I knew pretty much what mediums I was going to use and what the vibe of the book was going to be. And I felt pretty confident of my ability to pull off all the different kinds of portraits of trees and people that were going to be required of me in order to do the book. That's number one. Number two, I hired a graphic designer to make the book proposal so that it looked like how I envisioned the finished book would look. So a lot of the spreads in here, a lot of the way this book is sort of laid out was informed by the professional book designer that I hired to do a PDF sort of book proposal that that just kind of had this particular look to it and showed, you know, how the art could be placed relative to the text and about how long the text could be and what made sense in terms of, you know, a trim size and word counts and all that kind of stuff. So this was incredibly helpful for me because it really clarified what my vision was, but it also made sure that the publishers weren't just taking my word for it. They had something visual in front of them to be able to say, I see, this is what the author thinks this ought to be. Do we agree or disagree with that? Do we buy into that vision? Do we need to have a conversation about how maybe that should change? So that was incredibly useful. Number three was to be very clear in the contract on what my deliverables were going to be in terms of the illustrations. So I've been an author for a long time, and I'm used to telling them what the deliverable is going to be in terms of the text, right? It's going to be 80 to 100,000 words. It's basically a Word document that I am going to send you. But for the art, this was my first time doing this, and I was not at all embarrassed to tell people that and to say, you know what, I've never done this before, so I need you to understand what it is that I think I'm going to be delivering to you and make sure that works for you. Because if it doesn't, then I need to know that at the onset, because I might have to hire someone to help me. In particular, for me personally, my work is all analog. It's all on paper. So like, here are all the illustrations I made for this book. They're all on paper, and I made sure that they understood that what I was going to be able to supply them was an illustration on a piece of paper that I could then lay down on my scanner and press the button. And whatever the scanner put out, assuming that I've got a good scanner, which I do, and that the settings are all correct, which they are, that they were going to basically be getting raw images off the scanner, and that any cleanup that needed to happen, you know, to get this ready for print is something that I don't have the skills or know how to do, and I didn't think it was the best use of my time to do that. The other reason I didn't want to do all that extra work, in addition to just the fact that it would be a steep learning curve for me, is that writing a book is a lot of pressure, and I know from experience just writing the text of a book like this is a huge amount of work, and it's a lot of time in front of a computer. So physically, it's a lot of time at your desk. And then when you're also producing this many drawings, not to mention all the ones that didn't work out that I had to toss out, that's also a lot of physical time at a drawing table. So the last thing I wanted was more computer time on top of that, just having to like process these images and get them ready for publication. So we agreed on that from the outset. You know, I told him, look, if you're good with just getting these kind of raw images and you take it from there, then fantastic. If you're not, let me know that now, because I'm going to need to hire someone to do that part, and I need to kind of price this project accordingly. So that was helpful. That worked out. There's one caveat about that I will say, which is that in my case, I was drawing these in watercolor and colored pencil. So I already knew ahead of time that the bright lights of the scanner tend to wash watercolor out, because watercolor is a transparent medium. And what that meant is that a lot of my artwork would look kind of lighter, fainter, more washed out on the computer than it looked when I drew it. So I was very clear with them that there's going to need to be a process to bring the color back up. And that meant increasing the saturation and increasing contrast. So I was really trying to speak the language of color correction and imagery as I understood it, but trying to explain to them, like, we really have to bring a lot of vibrancy and richness back that the scanner's going to take away. And I will tell you, this was stressful for me, because what I didn't realize is that step is something that they do at the very, very end, after the book is fully designed. Right before it goes off to the printer, they do that step. So I was seeing these advanced proof pages where the art looked really pale and washed out, and it kind of stressed me out. You know, I really worried that, like, well, what if, you know, these are portraits of people, and what if these portraits of people kind of don't look like them because I've lost the skin tones and I've just lost, you know, the particular details of like hair color and stuff like that doesn't sort of look quite right. And they kept reassuring me, and they did do a fantastic job at the end. Maybe if I had this to do over again and it was also going to be watercolor and I was going to have that same issue, maybe I would hire someone to just go ahead and do some amount of color correction before it went to them. But that would have to be a conversation. Anyway, I'm really glad that I talked through all that stuff ahead of time. So another thing I learned, this is number 4, is insist on a book map, sometimes called a book design map or a book design template. Probably you can already guess what this is, right? Just by me saying it. It's sort of like a grid that kind of like lays out what goes on what pages. So like, you know, at the beginning of a chapter on the left-hand side, we're going to have an image. On the right-hand side, we're going to have like, let me just show you, you know, like maybe, so we know our book map would just have a little box for this that just says portrait with a little bit of text. And then this would say text with header type of text. And then it would tell me about how many words fit right here. Because it's going to be the same on every page, right? We just have to make this decision now. We got to make it early so I know. And then I know that the next thing that happens is we turn the page and I've got a full page of text and then part of a page of text, and maybe there's a range of how many words can go here depending on how big or small we want to make the art or how we want to place it. So having a template like that, a book map, means that when I'm writing the text, because you know I'm the author as well as the illustrator, so when I'm writing the text, I'm writing text that fits the design of the book. And I can also, as the artist, be thinking about things like, should I make these illustrations? Can they be square? Can they be horizontal? Can they be vertical? Depending on how it's going to be placed on the page. You know, here's an example of where the text was a little short, and so the art could just float here. It would have been more helpful to make this particular piece of art be more vertical and really fill the page. So those are the kinds of things that you can get a lot of help with if you have a book map. And I want to show you, sometimes we had what we call interstitials, which is a little sidebar type of thing with little bits of art and little bits of text. And you also want a book map for the different types of interstitials that there might be, so that you know how many you can fit on a page, how many words you can write about each person. You know, again, the shape of the image, should it be a square? Should it be long, tall and skinny? Should it be wider? And in this case, you can see, and again, this is because we didn't have a book map, but I didn't know exactly how these would flow, and we had this extra page that we just had to sort of fill. So those are some of the things that can kind of happen when you're, you know, working through a process like this. Okay, so insisting on a book map early on, and the thing is, depending on the publisher, they're either, if they do illustrated books all the time, and like maybe they do a lot of children's books, or they just do a ton of heavily designed books, then they'll be like, well, of course there's going to be a book map. Are you out of your mind? But if you have a publisher who mostly does books that are a lot of text, or maybe they're just like mostly text with occasionally just a blank page that we put a picture on, those folks might not be as accustomed to the idea of getting the design and production staff involved so early that we're going to pick out the trim size of the book, and we're going to decide about how many pages it is, and we're going to develop templates to lay out, you know, the weirder sort of little odds and ends that you might want to do, as well as just the regular chapters or however it looks. The other nice thing about a book map is that as you're writing and drawing, as you're getting into it, you might say to yourself, you know, I don't really have anything in the book map that conveys this idea I have. And then you can go back to your publisher and say, hey, I have another idea of how to do a 2-page spread here. Let me explain it to you, and can we run this past the design team and get a book map for that, so I know exactly how many images and how much text would work for this concept. Okay, book map, super important, brilliant idea. Also, at the beginning of the process, it's so helpful to ask your publisher about the format and delivery of the final images. In other words, how do you want these files transmitted to you? So what file format? Do you want them as JPEGs? Do you want them as TIFFs? What do you want? What's the resolution? You know, run through all your scanner settings with them, send them some samples and say, so if I transmit them to you and they're this works? You're happy with that? Yes or no? But also, how do you want them to come to you? Or is this going to be am I going to be Dropboxing these to you? Do you have rules for how you need the files named? What kind of document do I need to produce to show you which image goes with which section of text? How does all that work? And in my case, we did have that meeting and we did talk about it, and it was sort of like, yeah, so we're going to want, yes, you know, I'll upload them all to Dropbox, and whatever the file name is, we're going to need like a document that just sort of lists, you know, page number in your manuscript and which thing goes there and blah, blah, blah. And it all sounded fine. Once I got to the end of the process and the book was written and the files were all uploaded and it was all basically done, then I heard from the expert, the in-house expert on handling these documents and getting ready to go. And she was like, okay, so we have this whole set of rules on how we do this, and here's what they are. And I was like, oh my God, I did not know this was coming. I thought I knew what to do. And so I had a stack of images this big that were not named properly, did not have the kind of information in a spreadsheet that they wanted. I had done what I thought needed to be done, but what I didn't know to do in those initial meetings is to sort of say, okay, thanks for that information. Is there going to be a production coordinator who gets in touch with me at the end of this process and gives me a way more detailed set of rules? And if that's true, could I just talk to them now? Because that way I can do it all right the first time, and that'll save us all so much time later. So, I mean, it's one of those things, you just don't know ahead of time to ask for that. You get an answer, and then you don't know to later, to in the moment, sort of say, I hear your answer. Is there someone else who's going to have a different answer in the future? And can we bring them in right now? So anyway, now I sort of know that that's a thing and that publishers have a very particular way they want their files named and organized, and there might be a Google Doc or a spreadsheet that needs to be filled out and all of that. So be as clear as you can on that from the beginning to save yourself time. That's all I'm saying. All right. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. The sixth thing is I found that it was really helpful to me to work on the art gradually as I went. So I would write a chunk of text and I would do the art that goes with that. And then I would write the next chunk of text and do the art that goes with that. And part of the reason for that was that, of course, the ideas were all in my head. The mood was kind of there. If I was working with reference images, I kind of had them in front of me because I was just in the mix with that particular section of the book. But there was another really useful reason for doing it this way, and that is that gave me chronological time to get this done. So not only time in terms of like how many hours in the day, but like, you know, this book was like a 2-year project. It meant that I started doing the art at the beginning of year 1, and I was still working on the art at the end of year 2, and that chronological time that went by gave me the ability to think through how I wanted the art to be, to learn, to grow, to develop, such that, you know, by the end of the process, I could look back at some of those earlier images and go, oh yeah, I can see there's a few of these that I want to redo just to bring them up to the level that I kind of grew into as I was working on the book. Now, I know this is a big deal for book illustrators because I've heard other book illustrators talk about this, that as they're working on a project, their style sort of evolves and maybe even improves. But they have to kind of keep everything at the same level so all the art feels like it's in the same world. And so, you know, often that means that maybe you do go back and tweak a few at the beginning, or that you have to kind of hold back and restrain yourself to try to keep everything looking cohesive. So it's a little bit tricky, but it's much easier to do when you have the gift of chronological time, as opposed to you take a year and a half to write the book and you're in copy editing and blah, 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 and then you give yourself like a month to make all the art. And first of all, that's way too much time at the drawing table. You're going to totally burn yourself out. You're going to hate doing the art if you have to go at that rate. But also, you won't have enough time to just sort of develop your ideas and refine your thinking about how you want the art to be. Like this image, for instance, just was so easy and natural for me to do because I was well into the process and I just knew exactly how I wanted it to be, and I was approaching things with a lot more confidence. So I was okay with the fact that I went back and revisited a few of the earlier pieces and reworked them because of that. The other thing about, this is number 7, 7, is that because you're doing the art as you go, you can also submit the art as you go. So you can have a Dropbox folder or whatever it's going to be, and you're uploading the art as you go and asking for feedback. So really, it's so much better to involve your publisher and the design team and the production people early in the process and say, hey, I just uploaded another 20 images. And I wonder, do you want to take a look at them and see if this is the feeling that you're looking for, see if this fits with what you were expecting? A question I love to ask my publishers as we get near the end of a process is this the book you thought you were getting when we signed the deal? And give them an opportunity to say yes or no. It's much better to work those issues out early and work them out as you go. But the other thing it does is it puts a little onus on the publisher to pay attention and to be involved and be a partner, because they can sort of remember like, oh, we were invited to kind of collaborate on this early on. So that was our opportunity to really move it in a different direction if we wanted to, and we didn't. We felt like this was good, and so here we are. So I just think it's great to do that. And then another thing that goes along with this, so this is number 8, is when you're having those conversations with your publisher, be a leader. be someone who guides the conversation and provide the language and the vocabulary for them to talk about art. And this is important, you know, if you have a publisher who does a ton of design books or a ton of children's books, they probably have a pretty sophisticated language for talking about art. If you have a publisher who mostly does books that are all text or mostly text, they might not be as accustomed to that. So that's where it's helpful for you to step in and to give sort of a framework. So if you're sitting down to a meeting and they're wanting to talk about the art you've done so far, and maybe these little flowers are going to be part of it, you know, you can lead by saying, my vision for this book is that these flowers look like they came right out of my sketchbook, that this feels like the kind of thing that anybody could draw. Like, I don't want them to look like scientific botanical illustrations that maybe took days or weeks to fully develop. And we're not trying to make them look like photographs, because we had photographs, we're not using photographs. We want this to be art. And I want this to have a hand-drawn, sort of homemade feeling to it. You know, I don't want these portraits to look like elaborate studio portraits. I want them to have the warmth and the feeling of, I could be sitting in your backyard with you doing a sketch of you while we're talking. And that sense of immediacy, and that feeling of it being handmade and in the moment. So I'm using a lot of words to describe how I see this art, and I'm giving them the opportunity to maybe use other words in that kind of category. And so I think that, you know, for you for me as the artist and author and illustrator, to kind of have the openness and the willingness to have those conversations. Like, for instance, there are several images in the book of looking up at a tree, and I sort of explained that. I said, like, what I like about this is it suggests a human perspective, because we as humans are on the ground looking up at trees. And so I like this view because it suggests the involvement of a human, even though there's no human there. So this is me having language to talk about the art. And sometimes that even means explaining to them what it means to talk about saturation, or to talk about a warm color palette versus a cool color palette. Or, you know, let's say the idea of texture, like using colored pencil to create texture within a landscape that's otherwise watercolor. You can kind of explain what you mean by that. Like, you get a sense of the vegetation from the texture that comes from the pencil. So that's one of the reasons for wanting to use pencil. So be a leader. Don't assume that they're the experts in your art and how to talk about your art. You can walk in and be the expert on all that, but in such a way that you're facilitating them being able to have a conversation with you that uses a language that you can all be comfortable with, and you're helping them to understand what that language is. That's a great role for you to have as the artist illustrator. Okay, number 9, and this is a fun one, splurge on materials. Do not try to go cheap with materials. You are doing a book now, you're a professional, this is not a hobby. It's time to get good paper, get high quality colored pencils, get the very best watercolor. And what I found was really useful is to have multiples of everything. So for instance, I was drawing on watercolor blocks of hot press watercolor paper. I experimented. I bought very expensive, very high quality watercolor paper. I brought home several different types, and I did full illustrations on each of those types to see which one I liked best and which one I thought just sort of worked the most with my style. And then I also sent those to the publisher. And interestingly, the one that I liked the best, this is just Blick hot press paper. It's the one I like the most, and it's the one they like the most as well. And one of the reasons they like it is it's very bright white. And the fancy Fabriano paper and the Arches paper, even though it looked white to the eye, actually was much more yellowed when I scanned it, which just created one more color correction issue for them. So I was happy to spend the money on those blocks of Arches and Fabriano paper, which of course I've used for other things. But once I settled on the kind of paper, I also found that it was really useful to buy 4 watercolor blocks at a time. And these are not cheap. They're like 30, 35 bucks a piece, and I'm buying 4 of them at once. And the reason is I like to do the work while it's still on the block before I cut it off the block. And sometimes a drawing is not quite done, but I want to move on to the next one because I'm going to let this dry, or I'm going to think about it, or I'm going to something. So it's nice to have 4 of them at once so that I can have different illustrations in different stages, but they're all still on the block. I don't have to tear them off the block to get to the next sheet of paper. Sounds super obvious, but it took me a long time to figure that out. Same with like colored pencils. I got a ton of different options and tried them all out. And also with the watercolor, a thing I did there is that I had multiple watercolor palettes. One that I only used for skin tones, and those were all skin tone colors. One that I only used for all the different kinds of greens, like you can see here, a lot of different kinds of greens in this scene. So I just had one palette of just that. And then more general palettes with a little bit of everything in them. So having multiples of stuff allowed me to work more quickly and efficiently, and I think professionally. So this is the time. Get yourself the equipment you need to really do the job and do it right. And finally, number 10, I would say is once you're done and you turn it all in, you might have, I found that I had a lot of places where I thought they might need more art for this or that. And I'm just going to look and see if I can find, here's an example maybe. I was like, and I would have notes in the manuscript, like if you need more to fill the space, I can do more, just let me know. Like maybe you need more of just little trees, right? Just little fillers, extra trees. I could totally do extra trees. And then I finally realized, like, I shouldn't wait for them to ask for this. I should just do it and provide it. And as soon as I started providing stuff, they were like, oh, great, yes, we can totally use this. But they were weirdly kind of shy about asking for stuff, even though I was sitting around just waiting for something to do. So like these are called part openers. Like every section of the book has a kind of a 2-page spread that's a part opener. And for all of these part openers, they weren't quite sure what they were going to do there yet. And I had a note of like, I've got some ideas. Maybe we should have a meeting. I'm not quite sure. And then finally I realized, like, I don't know when we're going to have this meeting, but I have some good ideas. So I'm just going to spend a weekend and just do all these, and I'm going to upload them. And I sent those off, and on Monday morning they looked at them and they were like, oh, this is great. Yes, this is exactly what we need. We're totally going to use these. So take the initiative. Don't wait to be asked. If any ideas you have, get them out on paper and offer those to them and make them available for them to use. All right, well, those are just 10 of probably 100 different things I could say about the process of making, all of this artwork for the first book that I both wrote and illustrated. If you have more questions, post them in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them, or maybe I'll make another video and answer all of those at once. And also you can subscribe, like this video, but also I send out a newsletter and I'll put a link to that. So if you want to check that out or read any of my books, there's so many of them. They're all right here. I would love for you to take a look. Oh, wait, there's more. I also wrote all of these. So please check those out. I would love that. Thanks very much.